Hi, I'm Shelley Carabel, editor-in-chief of Reporting from Paris, in the gardens of the Palais Royal. This was the home of the Duc d'Orléans. He was the cousin of Louis XVI and the richest man in France, but he was also a revolutionary. Let's go and find out more. Hello, Edith.
Bonjour, Shelley.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So we're here in the Palais Royal.
Yes, we are.
Tell me a little bit about the Duke and why he was a revolutionary.
Duc d'Orléans was the cousin of Louis XVI, and Louis XVI is well known because he's a husband of Marie Antoinette and the last king of France, and he ended badly, Louis XVI. So the Palais Royal did belong to the brother of the kings, therefore he was the cousin of Louis XVI. He was very rich, and he had the idea to make shops and a gallery in the Palais Royal.
Did he need money? Is that why he made
Yes, he had the weakness. He had women and gambling. Yes, so here, it's funny because it's very elegant and quiet, but in 18th century you had prostitution, politics and gambling. His nickname during the French Revolution was Philippe Égalité.
Philip for
equality, yes, that was his nickname.
And there were also, we're sitting at an historic cafe right now, the Grand Beaufort. How does that play into the revolutionary scenario, or doesn't it? Cafes were a big part of Paris life, as they still are.
Yes, in the French Revolution, the cafes were the places where the people were talking, and especially here, another irony that is the royal palace, but this is where the French revolutionary were criticizing the kings. And an event very important during the French Revolution happened here just behind you. Galerie Montpensier. Camille Desmoulins, he was about 29 years old. He was a lawyer, but a stammer lawyer, meaning when you're a lawyer and a lawyer without clients, because also a journalist. And this is here where he crossed the Palais Royal, and he heard that Louis XVI had dismissed that Necker was the equivalent of Minister of Finance, had been dismissed. So Necker was extremely popular. So Camille Desmoulins was very angry, was shy, but suddenly became very brave. Maybe it's the place which encouraged him. So he was standing on a chair near the Café de Foix, just behind you, and he said, "Let's go to take the powder and the cannon, let's go to the Bastille."
Earlier, he was encouraging that. What was the problem financially at the time?
The problem that France had no money. That was a big problem. And as you know, France helped the Americans to make the revolution. So Louis XVI wanted to raise funds and to increase taxes to get money for the American Revolution.
It sort of begs the question as to why the king would want to support the American Revolution when it was standing for principles of republicanism and trying to overthrow a king themselves, or at least be free of George III.
Yeah, you're right. You're right to say it's irony that the French king helped the American, and after the French took Louis XVI out. I would say because French and American had an enemy in common, because you had the wars before time of Louis XV, and it was a disaster for the French, so they wanted the revenge.
Cafes like this actually were a place where revolutions were discussed, but not just here, but other cafes. What comes to mind?
Alors, when we think about the oldest cafe and the French Revolution, of course, it's Le Procope in the 6th. Which is the oldest cafe in Paris. So Le Procope is very important for the ideas. This is where all the French revolutionaries used to go, like Rousseau. But first of all, when I have to explain something important, that Le Procope was created in 1686. And first, it were the artists and the actors who were going, because you had across La Comédie Française. And if you see the name of the street of Le Procope, c'est Rue de l'Ancienne Comédie, Old Comédie. So first it was, when you have a theater, when you have the break, now you eat popcorn and you go to the bathroom. So it was the goal of the Procope. And the man who invented was an Italian, a smart man. He was a waiter coming from Sicily, Procopio, and he made use a French name, Procope. So that was the first goal. that's why, for example, you know, when you read about the French Revolution, you see, okay, Voltaire, so Enlightenment century philosopher who inspired the French Revolution, but who are not alive when the French Revolution arrived, because it's much later. So I thought, okay, Voltaire is well known. He was there drinking almost 50 coffee with chocolate. Yeah, good coffee, but not as strong. And Rousseau. And I thought it's weird because Rousseau, he has a strong link with the French Revolution, because all his idea of democracy, equality. But Rousseau was not a Parisian, you know, he was from Geneva, but he was a bit a misanthrope. He didn't like to go out in a party, on the reverse of Voltaire, for example. You know, we oppose Rousseau and Voltaire. But in fact, Rousseau went in the Procope, it's true, but he went because people don't know, but he was a playwright. And his playwright, a theater, was on the Comédie Française, just across the Procope. Mm-hmm. That's why Rousseau went Procope. He was linked with the theater.
Oh, I see. That's something you always think of him as back to nature. And
he wrote about inequality, equality already, just much before than writing about democracy, social contracts. So it's important.
Who else might have been there?
Alors Marin was very left-wing. He was a doctor, but also a journalist, and he had a newspaper called The Friend of People, very, very popular. And he had his printed press near the Café Procope, and there was a ring. So he was writing articles telling we want more blood, more blood, more blood. He was not a peaceful, he was not for peace. And when the article was ready, the bell was ringing and the employee was taking the article. And you can still see the ring if you go in the Procope. If you look up, you will see the bell.
I should end by asking you what happened to the Duc d'Orléans who lived here.
Alors, the Duc d'Orléans, people say it's true that he voted for the death of his cousin. Mm-hmm. Yes, alors even some people say that it seemed, you know, you had like, I don't know, 50-50, and he was the one who, you know, what the balance. Who decided. I don't know if it's really true, but that's the reputation. But it didn't bring him luck because he ended same as his cousin, beheaded, guillotiné, same.
Thank you very much, Edith de Belleville. This has been an interesting conversation.
You're welcome.